Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Local Review Body for the 13th of October 2025. As always, I will start with some introductions. I'm Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the Local Review Body, and to my right is Bailey Claire McLaren, and to my left, Councillor Ken Harvey. We are, by requirement, all members of the Planning and Placemaking Committee, which we normally sit. I also have with me, to my left beyond Councillor Harvey, Mr. Jeff Falk, who's our legal advisor today, and beyond him, Audrey Roberts, who is from Committee Services. And online we have with us Mrs. Leslie Tierney, who is a planning advisor to the LRB, and she has not been involved in any of these matters until they came through to us as an appeal. And with those introductions, we'll move on to the agenda. Members, can I ask, do we have any declarations of interest today? Councillor Harvey?
No objections.
And Bailey McLaren?
No.
Thank you very much. We have some minutes from the last Local Review Body. I will approve those as the only one of the three of us who actually sat on that meeting. So we now move forward to the first item on our list today, which is item 4.1. This is to do with a residential development in principle at land 60 metres southwest of Forest House in Dunkeld. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce for us.
Thank you, convener. We'll just run through the slide presentation to start with. So this is the location of the appeal site, denoted there with the yellow star. So to the east of Dunkeld, as you head along the A984 Military Road towards Capeth, and between the road and the river to the south there. Next slide. And then just zooming in, you can see the junction down to the appeal site from the main road, and that road leads you down to this property and another one on the banks of the river, and the application site is on the west side of the track within that yellow circle. And then some drawings that were submitted with the application. So again, the kind of the large scale location plan, which is the red line site boundary, and the blue line land in the ownership of the applicant next door. And then zooming in on that, again, you can see the red line includes the access up to the main road and goes around the appeal site. And then looking at some of the drawings in a bit more detail. So the blue land Forest House is the house that's in the ownership of the applicant, and the ground to the west side of the access track or road is the appeal site. As you'll see in the photographs, some trees and shrubs and things exist, and hedging. There's a couple of sheds, timber sheds within the application site. They're shown within that yellow circle there. And then this is the indicative. This is an application in principle, so it is indicative, but there are two kind of L-shaped drawings there, which indicate the footprint of a couple of dwelling houses that could go onto the site. And then this is just to zoom in on the access. So on the top side of the track there, you can see Forest House with its existing access, and then on the south side of the track, the appeal site with the access there. It does exist, that would take you into the properties proposed. And then some photographs. So this is the house, Forest House, in the ownership of the applicant. And then as you move round to the front of the house on the other side of the track, you can start to see the appeal site come into view. So the blue arrows indicate the approximate locations of the properties. The right-hand arrow is just to show where the house would be located. And as we move round, you'll see in a little bit more detail where that is. So this is a view from Forest House across to the appeal site, and those two arrows indicate the indicative positions of the houses that are proposed. And then just this is coming closer to the track in the front of Forest House. Again, the two arrows show the indicative positions of the proposed houses. And then coming into the access into the property. So the left-hand image there is looking north back up to the main road. So the red arrow is the access into the site. The blue arrow is one of the two houses would be positioned there. And then the right-hand photograph is looking south down the track towards the river. Again, the red arrow is the access into the site. The blue arrow shows the other, where the other house would be located. And then this is the access into the site as it exists, with the two arrows showing the indicative positions again. And then as you move into the site itself, you can see it's quite well screened around the outside with some existing trees. The yellow kind of oval there just highlights the kind of timber shed and a timber log store effectively on the top part of the site. And then this is looking from the western edge of the site back towards Forest House, and you can see those structures again. And then again, kind of moving round towards the north side of the site, the blue arrows indicate the indicative positions of the dwelling houses. And then again, this is kind of just looking a bit further to the south, so you can see there is an existing tree that is shown on the plans. There's no tree survey, but there is the tree in the middle there has been shown on the drawings. And the blue arrows again indicate the indicative position of the proposed houses. And then this is taken from the ecological survey that was submitted as part of the appeal. This wasn't available to the planning service when they determined the application. It's essentially to show the kind of the different habitat areas that exist in and around the property. The key there shows an ancient woodland boundary, bluebell ancient woodland indicator, and so on. Now, the application site boundary proposed hasn't been transposed onto this, but I think from what you can see on the right-hand image there is there are two black kind of small rectangles, and those would be the small timber sheds that exist on the site. So there's clearly an area of grassland, but there's then the area of bluebell's ancient woodland indicator, and then coniferous woodland and the ancient woodland boundary. I think that's the last slide. So introduction, the appeal site is an area of rough grassland, part of the adjacent property called Forest House, which sits to the north of the track, which leads down to the River Tay and another property on its banks. The area was formerly part of the original policies of Dalbeattie Estate. Access to the site and the properties on the track come off the A923 Dunkeld Capeth Road. The site was historically used for sawmilling activities, but no evidence of this remains on site. A mature woodland plantation in separate ownership borders the site to the west. Historical maps indicate that woodland extended across the site, but the trees which would have existed on the site have been cleared as part of previous operations. The only structures currently on site comprise a small storage shed and timber storage unit for the house. Historic permissions have been granted on part of the site for a garage and workshop, including residential accommodation, as the development at that time was viewed as fulfilling an essential need to enable and support the storage and seasoning of timber on site. And those approvals included occupancy conditions. The latest permission granted a number of years ago was not lawfully implemented, presumably due to the cessation of the business operations, and the land was presumably at that point sold on. And as you can see, the application shows an indicative layout for two houses. The reasons for refusal are firstly that the proposals are contrary to Policy 17, Rural Homes of MPF 4, as they fail to meet any of the 8 criteria listed within Policy 17, Part A. Secondly, the proposals relate to a greenfield site which is not allocated for development or explicitly supported by policies within the LDP, and the development is therefore contrary to Policy 9, Part B, Brownfield Vacant and Derelict Land and Empty Buildings of MPF 4. Thirdly, the proposals are contrary to Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside of the Local Development Plan and associated supplementary guidance, as the development does not satisfactorily comply with any of the categories: 1, building groups; 2, infill sites; 3, new houses in the open countryside; 4, renovation or replacement of houses; 5, conversion or replacement of redundant non-domestic buildings; and 6, rural brownfield land. And finally, as no ecological survey has been submitted, an assessment cannot be made as to potential ecological impacts. The proposals, as a result, are contrary to Policy 41 of the LDP and Policy 3 of MPF 4. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, it's noted that MPF 4 Policy 17A supports development for new homes in rural areas which are suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area and meet one of the following criteria. Firstly, is on a site allocated for housing within the LDP. Secondly, reuses brownfield land where a return to a natural state has not or will not happen without intervention. Reuses a redundant or unused building. Is an appropriate use of a historic environment asset or is appropriate enabling development to secure the future of historic environment assets. Is demonstrated to be necessary to support the sustainable management of a viable rural business or croft, and there is an essential need for a worker to live permanently at or near their place of work. It is for a single home for the retirement succession of a viable farm holding. Is for the subdivision of an existing residential dwelling, the scale of which is in keeping with the character and infrastructure provision in the area. And finally, or reinstates a former dwelling house or is a one-for-one replacement of an existing permanent house. Although there have previously been some forestry-related activities on the site, it's not considered to be brownfield. Planning Service state that the only clause in LDP 2 Policy 19 for houses in the countryside which could be applicable is building groups, but that is defined as 3 or more buildings of a size at least equivalent to a traditional cottage, irrespective of residential, commercial or agricultural nature. There is only one existing house, and the small timber outbuilding and store cannot be classed as buildings for the purpose of this policy. While Clause 6, development on rural brownfield land, should also be explored, an assessment is made under MPF 4 Policy 9, brownfield vacant and derelict land and empty buildings. The Planning Service state this is not applicable due to the naturalised state of the land and modest scale and nature of temporary building upon it. Incremental piecemeal development proposals have potential to erode the distinctive landscape qualities of Perth and Kinross. The woodland to the rear is out with the control of the applicant and likely to be subject to future felling, which would result in the loss of the main site containment and result in greater landscape and visual impacts. However, there is no specific reason for refusal in this regard. Turning to the applicant's case, they state that the proposal accords with the principle behind LDP 2 Policy 19 criteria for Category 3 development, specifically 3.4 houses for local people. It contributes to a clearly evidenced local housing need, and it aligns with the strategic goals of both Perth and Kinross Council and MPF 4. It also states that the proposed site, once developed further, will satisfy all 4 siting criteria in Category 3, including the development being naturally embedded in a hollow and not visible on any skyline. Trees provide visual containment, the site has recognisable long-established boundaries, and the proposal is landscape-led with effective visual containment. There is a pressing need for affordable family housing in the Dunkeld area, and affordability challenges are recognised in the local housing strategy. While the site shows signs of naturalisation, it is previously developed land. However, little information or evidence is provided by the appellant to demonstrate the historical use of all of the site as a sawmill. And then some other matters. There's no objections from statutory consultees or third parties. Roads have no objections and conditions are recommended in the event of the appeal being successful. The fourth reason for refusal is addressed by the submission of a preliminary ecological survey as part of the appeal. This notes that parts of the site are classed as ancient woodland. officers have not been able to comment on this as it did not form part of the application submission. While trees on the site are shown on the drawings, there's no tree survey to cover this point or the trees on the site boundary. And there's also no supporting technical information in terms of fill drainage or water supply. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll open up now for questions. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, Convener. I actually don't have any questions between what's been presented in the papers and the presentation. I'm fully satisfied.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Yeah, I have a brief question, Leslie, regarding the response from the applicants to the refusal. They lean quite heavily on the local, to paraphrase, sorry, local houses for local people type of thing. Could you just give a background as to your opinion on the kind of weights we should be given that type of opinion?
Okay, Councillor Harvey. I mean, obviously, with any matter, it's entirely up to the LRB itself to determine how much weight to put on particular matters. But to maybe just explain that element a bit further, it's clause 3.4 is in the supplementary guidance. So it requires applicants to demonstrate essentially that they're currently inadequately housed in some way, and the definition of that is that they're either in insecure housing or they're in unsuitable accommodation. So that kind of just explains what that clause is, and it's obviously up to yourself to the LRB to decide whether there's enough information that demonstrates that that clause has been complied with, because that's the case they're advancing.
No, okay, thanks. That's just what I didn't want your opinion on it. I just wanted to explain the background. Yes, Mr. Fogg has just given me the background to it. It seems to be requiring a specific person requiring a specific house seems to be the kind of the thrust of it. But okay, thank you very much for your background on that.
Thank you for that. I just have one question, Ms. Chair. This is to do with the ancient woodland. I think you mentioned, I just want to clarify, the part of the land is actually classified as ancient woodland, although there may not be any trees on it. Would that be right?
So what the ecological survey states is that the western and southern part of the site is classed as ancient woodland of long established plantation origin. What we don't have is a drawing that shows this is the application site and this is how it relates to that drawing that I showed you at the end of the PowerPoint there with the different colours and so on. So I think you know, the person who's carried out the ecological survey for the applicant and appellant is clearly of the opinion that part of the site is classed as ancient woodland. But, you know, that because that assessment hasn't been submitted until now as part of the appeal, nobody's had it, the planning service or their conservation officers haven't had an opportunity to comment on that and for more detail to be gleaned as to exactly where that is within the site.
Okay, thank you for that. So that's the only question I had. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Bailey McLaren?
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Harvey?
Yeah, happy to proceed.
And I too am happy to proceed. So Bailey McLaren, if you could kick us off for.
Thank you, Convener. I'm aware that the applicants have submitted an ecological survey that has not been seen by the planning officer who dealt with the original application. In other circumstances, I would have deferred to allow them to comment. However, as I have some other concerns about the application unrelated to the ecological survey, I'm not proposing to deter it for such comment. And it's providing you are, we all fall in, have the similar opinion. I also have, I don't see this as a grouping. I understanding where the applicant has created their grounds for appeal, but I am not finding the evidence to support the grounds, particularly the local housing need. The local housing need is, I believe, for affordable, accessible accommodation within Dunkeld. This site would not provide that, and there is no evidence to state that this site would, as part of possibly a local housing needs survey that maybe has been carried out. That hasn't been put in front of us either. I don't see it as a housing group, so I am happy to uphold the decision for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, well, thank you, convener. Yeah, I also will be voting to uphold the refusal. I think the council planning officers have reached the right result, detailing from NPF 4 in a variety of different ways. I'll not go into detail. And I don't think the applicant's issue regarding rural homes should really have any weight to overrule NPF 4. So I will be also voting to uphold the refusal. Thanks.
Thank you for that. For myself, there's been this is a greenfield site, although there have been claims that it could be classed as brownfield. Now, I went there myself to see it. It is quite obvious that nature has reclaimed the site. So I feel that the concept of brownfield is that it can take place if nature hasn't returned the site to nature, it hasn't reclaimed it, or there's some reason why it can't reclaim it. I don't think that is here. The site has gone back to a grassy area. It certainly isn't, I don't think, a building group as such. The question of brownfield, of course, varies between both our own LDP2 and National Planning Framework 4. Our own version of it, as said, will only consider it when nature hasn't reclaimed it, or there's a reason why it can't. Whereas it's a little bit more flexible within PF4, and it allows for it, subject to the position of our own LDP, which, as I've said, in this case doesn't apply because nature has reclaimed it. So I think the claim that it's a brownfield site is a weak one, and I certainly wouldn't want to follow that. The other strength put forward by the applicant is this interpretation of 3.4 of the supplementary guidance to housing the countryside, and this is to do with the housing need. Now, the applicant's claim is very much based on the local needs of the area. However, reading through this particular paragraph, my interpretation is, and I think my colleagues are the same, is that this relates to a specific person rather than a general need, which is not the case here. So I think the concept of utilising 3.4 is stretching a little bit, and to be quite frank, I wouldn't have accepted that at all. It is for a specific person. Given all that, I will agree with my colleagues to refuse the appeal, I think on this occasion. If I may query with you, Mr. Fogg, on the actual decision notice, reason for refusal 4 talks about an ecological survey, which we now have. So I'm of a mind that that should be deleted. However, as we've heard, there is also talk that this is an ancient woodland. And it's quite clear in National Planning Framework 4, Policy 6, that any encroachment on ancient woodland would not be supported. So I'm wondering whether that reason of refusal, trying to spit it out, should be changed from the ecological survey to wording regarding the ancient woodland, subject obviously to my colleague's agreement. So I'm wondering if you could comment on that, Mr. Fogg.
You're correct, convener, that following the refusal by the planning service, the applicants commissioned the ecological survey, and that was lodged as part of this review application, and therefore the fourth reason for refusal is no longer applicable or correct. You're also correct in saying that from the evidence in the ecological survey, some at least of the appeal site does appear to be classified as ancient woodland. As Ms Tierney said, we don't know the precise delineation of that, but looking at policy 6 of NPF 4, it's breached if any of the site at all involves the loss of ancient woodland. So in the face of it, if you wished, condition 4, the fourth reason for refusal would fall to be deleted, but you would be free to impose an alternative fourth reason that insofar as the proposal requires some development within an area classified as ancient woodland, it's contrary to policy 6 of NPF 4, if that was the wish of the three of you.
Can I just check my colleagues if they're happy with that? Lady McLaren?
Sorry.
Yes, happy convener.
Councillor Harvey?
Similarly.
Then if we could then, Mr Fogg. Thank you. I know there's a gentleman here from Mackenzie Strickland. I'm sorry, in this case, it's all been refused, the appeal. Thank you. So members, we'll now move on to item 4.2, which is the erection of 2 estate properties and garages, formation of access road connecting to existing estate road and associated works at Taymouth Castle in Kenmore in Aberfeldy. Now, before we proceed on this one, if I may, as we know, this is a complex and considerably sized planning application revolving around Taymouth Castle. As such, and given there is a formal request within the papers for a site visit, I am of a mind to defer this. I unfortunately didn't have a chance to get there because of the timing. I'm not sure if my colleagues will agree to that, but I feel that given the complexity of the planning application overall and the work that's been done here, and there is a formal request for a site visit, I'm going to suggest at this stage we defer until we have done such. Mrs. Tierney, would you like to comment on that at all at this stage?
Not especially, convener. I mean, it's absolutely correct. You know, the applicant has requested a site visit, and whilst you're not obliged to do that, I think it would be beneficial given the particular characteristics of the site and the location and the design landscaping, etc. For you to, you know, obviously there's a PowerPoint and it will show you a lot of detail, but given there's been a request for a site visit and the issues that the application revolves around, it probably would be advisable for you to defer and carry out a site visit and bring it back to a later meeting.
Fine, thank you. So I need to ask my colleagues. Ben McLaren, would you be in agreement with that?
Convener, yes, I do agree with you. I also unfortunately hadn't the time to visit the site, although I know aspects of the site. So given the the amount of papers that we've been submitted in this application, I think a site visit would be appropriate to agree to.
And Councillor Harvey?
Yep, similarly. Yep.
Thank you very much. So we've agreed that we would defer this and hear the whole report, obviously, when we actually seen the site itself. So, Mr. Fogg, are you able to organise that for us?
Yes, convener. Normally, the planning advisor would be able and keen to accompany yourselves on that site visit. I understand that could be difficult for Ms Tierney to fulfil next month, and in these unusual circumstances, it would be my proposal that Ms Brown and I liaise with both the Council's planning officer and the applicant's planning consultant and see if they would do a jointly accompany yourselves on the site visit to allow it to progress in the absence of Ms Tierney, which I'm quite sure should be possible. So with your agreement, Audrey and I will make arrangements for that to happen.
I'm in agreement. You're yep. And Councillor Harvey, yep. Okay, fine. So we'll leave that then for arrangements for a site visit. I know we have a lady here from Scott Hobbs. I'm sorry it's been a wasted journey for you, but I think in view of the complexity of it would be better if we do it for site visit, and you have formally asked for it, so we would. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, you heard what I said to the convener. Ms Tierney can't at the moment travel, and I thought you would be, perhaps I was hoping you'd be willing to cooperate with the planning case officer of the council, and if he, so that there was not equality of arms, but you were present and he was present when they were done, and perhaps you and Mr Williamson could agree a natural sequence around the designed landscape to allow the planning merits of this application to be properly assessed on site, and coordinate diaries in conjunction with Ms Brown. Is that okay? Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, convener.
Thank you for that. So with that, we will now move on to item 4.3, which is the installation of an amateur radio mast and aerial at 1 Orchard Way, Inchture, Perth. And Mrs. Tierney, if you could start us off on this one.
Thank you, convener. Again, we'll just run through the slide presentation. So aerial image, Inchture itself, and the yellow star is where the appeal site is located. And then zooming in on that, within the circle, the property at the end of the development there at the junction of Orchard Way and Moncur Road. And then some of the drawings submitted with the application. So the existing site plan, so the red line delineates the outline of the property and the application site. And again, this is the existing site plan, just in a little bit more detail. And then we have the proposals for the application. So this is the yellow circle is the location of the mast in the top corner of the site. And then elevations are perhaps more useful for you. So just to explain what we've got here, this is obviously the front elevation of the property, and you can see the bottom arrow is the bottom of the mast, if you like. The middle arrow is the aerial on the top of the mast at that height when it's lowered. The yellow line is then the difference between what would be the lowered height and the top arrow there is the operating height of 15 metres. And then just some other elevations. So this is the east elevation of the property. So again, you can see the mast and then the height of the extended height. And then from the other side of the property. And then this is from the rear of the property there. So you can see, obviously we've got the lowered height of the mast. The ridge height of the house is shown there as well, about a metre or so above the lowered height of the mast, and then the operating height at 15 metres above the height of the house. And then this is just an elevational drawing, telescopic mast structure. So just one way, one the other, so you can see how it extends out from its lowered height to the maximum height. And that's just the fixing, the ground fixing details. And then we've got some photographs of the appeal site. So this is the front of the house, front elevation. Again, as you can see at the junction of Orchard Way and Moncur Road. And then this is the rear of the property. As you look towards it, there is an open area of fields at the rear, and then other dwelling houses to the opposite side of the property. The side view that faces Moncar Road. Now, you'll see in the photographs here the kind of apparatus and structures and things that are within the garden at the moment are not what the application is. That's the current apparatus that the applicant uses. So you can see kind of aerials and things. And then just zooming in a bit more closely, just so you can see the relationship of the house with the other houses along the street as well. And then this is a side view from the other side of the road. So again, you can just see the kind of aerials and things that are there at the moment. But this is the view that you would largely see where the mast would be located. And then this is round the side of the existing property. So again, you can see some of the existing kind of antennas and aerials and so on. And then coming around to the other side of the property, again, there's kind of this a wire that runs along between the ones at the side of the house, held up by this other aerial. And then round to the back of the property. So the existing aerial that's there is the position of where the new mast would be located. It would effectively replace that. And you can just see that again from the other side, looking to the back of the property. Okay, so as you've seen, the appeal site is a modern two-storey detached dwelling house situated in a residential area of Inchture, adjacent to the junction of Orchard Way and Moncar Road. The amateur radio mast and aerial lie within the curtilage of the house closest to Moncar Road. The proposed installation is a tilt-over telescopic 3-section lattice-type mast. The installation would consist of a foundation block, base plate and associated 1.8 metre mounting post, the three 6.3 metre sections of the mast and a 1.5 metre head unit, resulting in a potential height of 17.7 metres. The antenna would not be raised beyond 15 metres. For the majority of the time, the mast and aerial would be at the lowered height of around 8 metres. When it is being operated 2 to 3 times a week for 2 to 3 hours, the mast would be raised to a maximum of 15 metres. The aerial at the top of the mast can be rotated and the mast is raised and lowered using a manual winch. The reason for refusal is that the proposed mast and aerial, by virtue of its substantial height of 8 metres when lowered, its excessive operating height of 15 metres, its excessive maximum height of 17.7 metres and its siting in a highly visible location adjacent to Moncar Road, would have a detrimental impact on the character and environmental quality of the application property and the surrounding area. Approval would therefore be contrary to Policy 16G1, Quality Homes of MPF4, and Policies 1A and 1B-C, Placemaking of the Perth and Kinross LDP2. The assessment by the Planning Service notes that the proposed mast is an amateur radio mast that is to be used by the applicant for hobby purposes. Installations of this height normally have some public benefit, for example, pylons and phone masts. The proposed mast is not domestic in scale, making it inappropriate for the residential setting. At its operating and maximum heights, it would be a similar height to a 4-storey building, and it would tower above the nearby streetlights and telegraph poles. At its lowered height, it would be almost as tall as the applicant's 2-storey house. The mast would be installed near the junction of Orchard Way and Moncar Road. This prominent location, meaning it would be visible from the public domain in 3 directions. From Moncar Road to the southwest, some immature trees adjacent to the site may partially obscure the mast at its lowered height. However, at its operating and maximum heights, the mast would be a highly prominent feature. Whilst there are mature trees on the northwestern side of Moncar Road, these would give no visual containment when viewing the mast from the southwest. From Moncar Road to the northeast, the immature trees would give some backdrop to the mast at its lowered height. However, whether at its lowered, operating or maximum height, it would be a highly prominent feature. Again, the mature trees on the northwestern side of Moncur Road would give no visual containment from this direction. From Orchard Way and Hawthorne Dean Place to the north, and to the southeast and east, the applicant's house would screen the mast from view, but only when it's at its lowered height. At its operating and maximum heights, the mast would become visible above the roof of the applicant's house, making it a visually prominent feature when viewed from some of the streets and houses in the housing estate. Turning to the applicant's case, they hold a full amateur radio licence issued by Ofcom and have over 40 years operating experience. Since moving to Inshture 4.5 years ago, they have been operating with long wire aerials in their garden. These aerials, due to their height, are not as efficient as preferred, and as they are fixed in an east-west orientation. The proposal allows them to raise the transmission reception aerial to more efficient height. The maximum transmission power levels used by radio amateurs are restricted by licence conditions and are comparatively low. This requires extremely efficient aerials, and height above the ground and surrounding buildings and structures is one of the most important factors contributing to the efficiency of the aerial system. For shortwave frequencies used by radio amateurs below 30 MHz, ground is a good reflector. The dominant factor is specular reflection, and for antennas raised above the ground, radio waves reflected specularly by the ground will travel a longer distance than direct waves. And secondly, using a rotating directional aerial means that being able to rotate and point an aerial is very beneficial, as when receiving, it enables the aerial to pick up radio signals from a specific direction, and when transmitting, to direct the transmitted signal on a specific bearing towards different countries. Rotating an aerial has a further benefit, as it can enable a strong or interfering signal to be nulled out by turning the aerial away from it. In assessing the location of this mast on their property, they have sought to cause no annoyance and minimise the visual impact on neighbours and the wider community. The location of the property is on a corner site with only one immediate neighbour. The site is screened by dense standing of tall trees to the west and to a lesser extent to the south, and as a result, the proposed installation would have minimal visual implications for neighbours and the community. There are no houses or gardens that have an outlook either north, east and southwest along Moncur Road. Only pedestrians or drivers on Moncur Road would have this viewpoint. The approach from the southwest has a number of prominent street lighting poles and some trees that make the mast location less visible. The mast is a zinc grey open lattice structure and is less prominent than a solid structure would be. The guy ropes, which were part of the pre-application, have been removed, as they will not extend the mast in winds greater than 22 miles an hour, which is when stabilising guys would begin to be a requirement. The time taken to raise or lower the mast, which is by means of a manual, which is in the order of about 5 minutes, and so no distracting movement would be visible during the time a driver was passing the site. The applicant considers that Policy 23 health and safety should also be used in the evaluation, and this states that development proposals that will have a positive effect on health will be supported. Having a more capable home radio installation will contribute positively to their mental well-being and provide an element of future-proofing when age prevents them operating portable away from home. Other radio amateurs in the UK have installations similar to this, including some in the Perth area, and they did not need to demonstrate public benefit. Radio amateurs provide a voluntary communication service, particularly in emergencies or natural disasters, and they have over 30 years service as a member of the Radio Amateur Emergency Network. It is an Ofcom requirement of licence conditions that any transmissions fully comply with the International Commission on Non-Ionising Radiation Protection Guidelines. And in terms of other points, the Radio Society of Great Britain comment that although the application is for a larger lattice type mast, it reflects the applicant's wish to practice amateur radio at a higher technical standard. There are technical restraints that limit how small shortwave antenna can be and how low to the ground they can be. And it's argued that there is not sufficient detriment to visual amenity, and there are many such examples nationwide. And then finally, there are also 5 other letters of support from neighbouring residents and no objections. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll open to questions. Councillor Harvey.
I've got no additional questions.
And Bailey McLaren.
Equally, I have no additional question.
And I have no questions either. So, Councillor Harvey, if you could start us on this one. I've jumped the gun then. I beg your pardon, everybody. I've just got out of my out of movement there. I don't know what wrong there. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we need more information? Councillor Harvey
No, I feel the information is sufficient.
and Bailey McLaren. And I'm happy to proceed. And thank you, Councillor Harvey, for putting me right. So over to you for the first one.
First time for everything, convener. I'm quite happy to allow the building of the mast, so overturning the planning decision. I've noted although it does breach some of the planning constrictions, I know a lot of the comments about amateur radio, but this is the only one that's ever really been refused. I note the comments of support from his neighbours and various other people. So therefore, I'm happy to overturn the planning application and allow the building of the aerial.
Thank you for that. I'll put my comments in there. I have to be honest with you, I've learned something. I thought amateur radio was something almost of the past in this modern day of technology, but there we are, you learn something as you go along. So they're still here. It's an unusual case, really, and one that took some thinking about, having visited the site as well, because I have to say that in the actual report, there's a little bit of confusion here, which seemed a bit odd to me, in as much that at one point the officer was saying obviously he's concerned about the height of the aerial, and it may be up permanently, which was a concern. And then further on, he was saying that if we had a permanent structure up, the public would get used to it, and therefore it's not a problem. So there's a bit of a to and fro here. I would suspect the other concern I had when I saw the site was the fact that if it's that high with high winds, that might be something to be concerned about, because it could obviously go straight across the road. But then, of course, you have to take into account, I suspect, that the aerial equipment on the top is probably quite valuable as well. So my thoughts were, on balance, given there was no objections to the site, sign of this, given that to protect the equipment, I'm sure the applicant would be winding it down if there's high winds. I would be inclined, like you, Councillor Harvey, to approve the appeal on this occasion. It's an unusual one, and as I took a lot of thinking about, but I think I'm sure that this will not be left up without guy ropes in bad weather, which was the concern I had. So that, all in all, I'm happy to grant the appeal. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. Yes, unusual. Didn't know a lot about amateur radio, but seem to have a bit more information in my head now about masts. Given that the mast too, as you point out, will be lowered, as particularly in high winds, it would look to be that there will be minimal neighbourly impact, given that it is a corner site, and there is woodland close by. It wouldn't affect sight lines. Yeah, I too would agree with yourself and Councillor Harvey and grant approval of the application. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I have a unanimous decision to grant the appeal. Another point I considered and wonder what your thoughts are, whether there should be a temporary condition for a period of time to see how things go. It's an unusual one, and I was thinking perhaps a temporary condition of at least 10 years, but I wonder what your thoughts are. Councillor Harvey first, mate.
If that's okay with legal, I'm quite happy with that as well too.
Bailey McLaren, you happy with that?
Yeah, that's a good point, convener. Yeah, I think that's fair and reasonable. And 10 years is a reasonable length of time, so happy to agree to that as well.
Yeah. So, Mr. Fogg, we have a unanimous agreement to grant the appeal, but on a temporary basis for 10 years at this stage.
Thank you, convener. And I've noted the agreement also that you would want the approval to be subject to a temporary duration of a 10-year period. I wonder if you would allow Ms. Tierney the opportunity to consider whether there were any other conditions of a standard nature to be applied to such a consent, and for that to be delegated to her. There's not maybe very much other than the development to be approved in accordance perhaps with the plans and as shown in them, but maybe there's one or two more that should usefully be attached.
Mrs. Tierney, would you have any other additional conditions?
I mean, off the top of my head, there may be some that you may find more generally on something like a wind turbine application, you know, in terms of the condition of it, the maintenance of it so that it's kept in good order and so on. But I'm happy for that to be delegated back, and I can confirm.
Thank you. Yeah, but Ms. Bob, fine. Okay, fine. So, Mr. Grieve, you've been approved unanimously. I would say that's a 10-4 from us, but I don't know whether you use that phrase in the ham radio, so there's my ignorance there, but it's all been approved for you. Thank you. So, members, we'll now move on to the final paper today, which is number 4.4. This is the erection of a dwelling house, land 75 metres west of 8 Langside Drive in Comrie. And Mrs. Tierney, if you can come back to us on that one.
Thank you, convener. Again, we'll just run through the slide presentation to start with. Comrie here, aerial view of Comrie and the appeal site marked with the yellow star just on the south side of the village there. And then zooming in a little bit closer, you can see the B827 road, which runs to the south of Comrie, kind of green space area beside the road and to the rear of Langside Drive, and the appeal site within the yellow circle there. And then these are the drawings submitted with the application. So the red line round the site, location plan here. And then zooming in a bit more on that. So this is the existing site plan shown with the green area and the red line round about it. The area of ground to the north side there has the outline of a property which has planning permission. So that's the roof plan of the house on the site next door. And then this is the proposed site plan. So again, that house to the top side is shown on that drawing, and then you've got the roof plan shown on the site plan here, the access coming in off the existing access, driveway to the front alongside the road, and front garden area. And then these are the elevations of the property. It is over 2 stories, so there is accommodation in the roof. The elevation with the circle round it is the elevation that you would see on entering Comrie from the south. And then the ground floor plan, first floor plan, 4-bedroom dwelling house. And then these are the kind of artist's impressions of the some of the elevations of the property. This doesn't include the elevation that you would see facing driving in to the south, but it gives you a better appreciation of what the house would look like. And then these are the photographs of the site. So the location of the house is where the blue arrow indicates. You can see a hedge that runs along the edge of the site there, and the yellow line pretty much just denotes the boundary of the appeal site. You can see the houses on Langside Drive just in the distance there. And then this is from the opposite side of the road, so we're looking across to the area of green space where there is permission, an extant permission for 3 houses, and then the blue arrow on the right hand side there indicates the location just to the right there of the appeal site. And then this is now from the other side of the road, just looking south on the road out of Comrie, and you can see the blue arrow there indicates the house position. And then this is back on the side of the road where the development is located. The yellow line is the boundary of the site. The red line, the red arrow is the access into the site once you've come off the main road from that existing access. and the blue arrow is the house position. And then just looking a little bit more closely, looking south from the development side of the road, again, the yellow line is the stretches along the boundary of the site, and the blue arrow is the position of the house. And then this is looking into, again, most of the image there is the other ground, which has permission for 3 houses. The orange arrow is the position of the house that I showed you on the site plan that had been drawn on for what had been previously approved. And then you can see that orange arrow again, and then the blue arrow is the appeal site house. And then just looking at it, so you can see the hedging that runs along the appeal site boundary. And then just a bit more closely again. So you can see the hedging that runs around the boundary of the site. And then this is now looking back towards Comrie, so we're starting to come round to the south side of the application. So again, you can see the blue arrow is the position of the new house, and the orange is the first of the 3 houses on the top side. And then this is where the 20 mile an hour limit comes into play at the edge of the settlement. The whole site is within the settlement boundary. And then just a couple of closer images of the garden that would remain in the donor property. And on the left and then on the right hand side, you're now looking from Langside Drive side to the main road. And then this is just a closer image of the ground that would remain within the existing property at 8 Langside Drive, and the blue arrow behind the hedge there where the new house would be located. And then this is just looking at the existing access, which leads into the development, which has extant planning permission and would be used for this development also. And then you can see the extension of the footpath there, and then the gate that leads into the application site. And then this is just an image from further along the road as you come into Comrie. So you can see the edge of the settlement there with houses on the left hand side, and then Langside Drive just further to the right. And this is just for information. This is the settlement boundary from the local development plan. So the appeal site is contained within that yellow circle and contains, it's effectively a piece of white land in the settlement, and there's an existing permission for 3 houses. And this site would be our 4th house, again, all within the settlement boundary and not in the countryside. And then just for further information, this is to illustrate the planning history. So the left image is a historic permission for 2 houses, which is no longer in place, has expired. But you can see the appeal site is within the yellow oblong, and that was within one of those 2 plots which previously had permission. The middle image is the extant permission for 3 houses. So in this case, you can see the yellow oblong is out with the site for 3 houses, which has permission. And then the image on the right, you can see the kind of detailed plan of those 3 houses and how the appeal site relates to that within the yellow rectangle. So by way of introduction, the appeal site forms part of an area of ground to the rear or west of 8 Langside Drive. It lies within the settlement boundary of Comrie to the south of a triangular area of ground between Braco Road, the B827 to the west, and the established residential area on Langside Drive to the east, which has permission for 3 houses and detached garages. The wider site was formerly a small agricultural holding, plant nursery on the outskirts of the village of Comrie. The proposal is a detached 4-bedroom house with accommodation over 2 floors. It's finished with white render walls and random rubble natural stone on the front elevation, grey timber cladding, a natural slate roof and grey timber doors and windows. Access is from the junction already formed from the B827. One tree is to be removed from the northeast corner of the site to enable the development. An existing copper beech hedge surrounds the site on 3 sides, and a hedge on the east boundary separates the site from the remaining garden ground for 8 Langside Drive. The reason for refusal is that the proposal for an additional dwelling house in this area is poorly designed. The design density and siting fails to respect the character and amenity of the place, does not take account of local context, and will have a negative impact on the visual amenity of the area and local character. Further, the proposal is not consistent with the 6 qualities of successful places set out in National Planning Policy. The proposal is contrary to NPF 4 Policy 14 Design Quality and Place and LDP 2 Policy 1 Placemaking and associated supplementary guidance and Policy 17 Residential Areas of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. The assessment by the Planning Service notes that the principle of development is compatible with the settlement boundary. However, full consideration must be given to site context, design, layout, scale, massing and impacts upon residential amenity. This is a prominent site on the Braco Road. To the north of the site is a triangular area of ground with several historic planning permissions, the last one granted for 3 houses. The creation of a vehicular access implemented this permission, however the dwelling houses have not been built to date. The approved houses were a high-quality design with high-quality finishing materials and boundary treatments, and it was considered that they would make a positive contribution to the street scene. The application site is indicated as a paddock on the approved plan. It is currently set out to lawn with hedge planting and trees and shrubs, offering an attractive green buffer between the plots and an agricultural field to the south. A previous permission included the application site, but this is not the permission which has been lawfully implemented. It was also only a permission for 2 houses. The proposed house is forward of the building line of the approved houses to the north. It therefore does not respect the broad building line. The plot is smaller than the plots to the north, and the dwelling house is crammed into the site, illustrated by a 1 metre gap from the site boundary and the north elevation and east elevation of the house and the positioning of the parking area to the front. The proposal does not respect the density and layout of the approved plots to the north. Poor siting and design are further reflected in the private garden ground and amenity space, which is inappropriately located to the front of the dwelling house next to the roadside. This is a highly visible site on the B827, and the site is currently set out to lawn. It will have a negative impact on the character of the area. Turning to the applicant's case, it is argued that the Planning Service gives undue weight to the permission for the unbuilt site to the north. The site is not a designated buffer for another development. The site is within the settlement boundary and has previously been granted consent for residential use. The proposal specifically retains the established copper beech hedging, and the small scale of the house will not significantly alter the visual approach to Comrie, so the visual buffer will be maintained. The proposal continues the urban pattern of standalone properties within a garden setting. The house is compatible with the scale of other buildings on Braco Road. The proposal is designed to respond to the location and character of the surrounding built environment, and the design is compatible with the scale of neighbouring developments and incorporates natural stone and slate finishes. There is not an established building line even if the neighbouring site is developed. The proposed house sits at the same distance to the road as the second house and further away than the third one. The building line is therefore not a consistent design factor. The access is already established and the proposals are properly orientated to respond to both street and field to the south. It is not clear why a proposal for a smaller house on a smaller plot should not be acceptable or encouraged. The house is placed at one end of the plot to minimise any impact on the site to the north and to maximise the benefits of the plot aspect, and most of the house is 2.5 metres from the boundary. The proposal includes a private area to the rear and clothes drying area. The design is for a bespoke house in a beautiful setting. It does not seem reasonable to use standard estate housing guidelines in this context, and some flexibility should be allowed. And in terms of other comments, there is one objection which states that the proposal is out of character and that the building line is not followed. and that the house is too far forward, that the plot is considerably smaller than surrounding plots, that the house is too large for the plot, and road safety matters. And then there's no developer obligations required in this case, and various conditions would be required if the appeal is upheld, including archaeological, compensatory planting, ecological enhancement, and roads matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have the questions. Bailey McLaren.
Do I have any questions? No, I don't think I do. Thank you, though.
Councillor Harvey.
Yes, convener, thanks. I do have one brief question, and it's just more about the way a couple of things are written. There's the reason for knocking back this, for rejecting it in the first place, was that and I'm just quoting here, the proposal is poorly designed. Now, does that mean the overall proposal is poorly designed, or the house itself is poorly designed? I'm assuming it's a proposal from your tone, Ms. Tierney.
Yeah, I think it's the proposal as a whole, because it's talking about it. Then mentions the design specifically, so it talks about the whole proposal being poorly designed, comma, the design presumably then of the dwelling house and the density and siting. So I think it is more about the whole proposal, councillor.
Okay, I think that was quite clear, particularly your comments regarding the back garden and that type of thing too. So no, okay, thanks very much, Mr. Tierney.
Yeah, I have no questions myself. So members, can we proceed to determine the application for a review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey McLaren.
Happy to proceed.
And Councillor Harvey.
Also happy to proceed.
Too, I'm happy to proceed on this one. I'll start us off on this case. Obviously, from the plans we've seen, this plot is slightly narrower than those of the other three which are shown on the permission, and that obviously means that the house will, in my opinion, will have a sense of being crammed within the site. So that's a fair enough comment, I think, and acceptable, I think, in this case. However, there are points raised here, particularly the business regarding the garden amenity space, and that the front garden does not constitute private amenity space. There's also questions raised about the building line. Now, given that the land behind the property is part of the garden ground of 8 Langside Drive, is that right? Yes, and that is owned by a relative of one of the applicants. The suggestion that perhaps a little bit more space is taken out of that garden ground to increase the plot size for this house and thereby move the house back would, I think, alleviate 2 points. One is, of course, it would help re-establish that building line and overcome that argument, and also it would allow the house to have some back garden amenity space, which would be more acceptable to planners. So in this instance, my thoughts are to refuse the appeal, but I feel there are satisfactory means to overcome this with a future application. So as it stands at the moment, to refuse the appeal, but I think there are solutions available on this one. Bailey McLaren.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I do know the village of Comrie very well, and this is one of the important entries into the village. It is a highly visible site. Overall, I'm in agreement with our planning officers. This either the property that is in front of us, the application is too big for the site. So if more ground is unable to be added to the site, I think redesign of the aspirations of the site would be beneficial, because it is within the settlement boundary. Granted, that is. So therefore, if something came forward that was less visible, less impactful within the given area of land. But on this occasion, I'm in agreement and upholding the officer's decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Yep, similarly uphold the council officer's rejection of this plan. As Bailey McLaren said, there is probably a house to be put here, but probably not this one. So I agree with you both.
Thank you both for that. So we have a unanimous decision, Mr. Fogg here. The only thought I had was, and it came up, I think, in the appeal, is a bit of confusion over the actual reasons, and I just wondered whether we should be more specific with regards to our policy 1. Perhaps it should be 1A, and when we talk about MPF 414, I wonder if that should be 14 brackets C. Not sure if that's right. Have you advise us on that?
I think generally established advice is that particular policies or sub-policies should be specified and not left to the generality of the proposal in fairness to applicants. So it's good practice, and I think yes, it would be appropriate here.
I think my two colleagues are in agreement. Yes, we both are. So that's a unanimous agreement on that one. So that and then brings us to the end of today's papers. So it only remains for me to thank you both for your assistance, and you, Mr. Fogg, as well. Mrs. Tierney, we'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you very much, everyone.